The morning fog hadn't lifted yet when the order came. All female prisoners line up for delousing. The words sliced through the damp air like a blade. German women shuffled out of their barracks, coats buttoned to their throats, eyes darting between the guards. They didn't yet understand what delousing meant, but the sound, metal clippers being oiled, told them soon enough. The first to sit was a nurse from Hamburg, 23, her braid so long it brushed her belt. She clenched her jaw as a British corporal held her head steady. The clippers buzzed once, then choked through her hair. Strands fell in pale curls onto the concrete floor. Nobody spoke, only the hum of machines and the muffled sobs of women filled the tent. They weren't being punished, at least not officially. Typhus had torn through POW camps across Europe that spring, killing thousands. British records show lice outbreaks hit 1 in 5 prisoners. Cutting hair wasn't vengeance, it was containment. But to those women, stripped of everything but dignity, it felt like punishment designed to erase them. One woman whispered, "They call it hygiene, we feel humiliation." The corporal said nothing. Orders were orders. Behind him, a Red Cross inspector ticked names off a clipboard, noting compliance. Even the prisoners' faces became numbers in a clean, bureaucratic process. By noon the floor looked like a battlefield of hair. Blonde, brown and grey mixed, anonymous, dead. The guards stepped carefully through it. When the last head was shaved, the camp commander gave a nod. The women were handed thin cotton scarves to cover their scalps. "For your comfort," he said, his tone as dry as paper. Outside, the wind caught those scarves like surrender flags. Some women refused to cover their heads at all. Others wept quietly, fingers tracing the stubble, as if searching for proof that they still existed beneath the skin. In one corner, the nurse from Hamburg found a tin mirror. She lifted it, her reflection fractured by dents and rust. What stared back at her wasn't an enemy soldier, not even a woman she recognized, just hollow eyes beneath a skull's shadow. She lowered the mirror slowly, whispering, "Who am I now?" And as she whispered, the nurse behind her reached for the same mirror, seeing something even more unbearable staring back. The tin mirror passed from hand to hand like contraband. Each woman stared into it and flinched. The reflection showed strangers, bare scalps glinting under weak daylight, eyes swollen from tears, lips trembling with disbelief. The nurse from Hamburg tried to smile, but her mouth wouldn't obey. She looked like a ghost pretending to be alive. She wrapped a scarf tight around her head, hoping to feel normal again. But the cloth scratched her skin and made her sweat. Some women did the opposite, ripped their scarves off and stood bareheaded in defiance. One said quietly, "If they think we're lice, let them see what they've made." A ripple of nervous laughter followed, the first sound of rebellion since the clippers. That night, the air inside the barracks turned sour from disinfectant. The women couldn't sleep. The sound of scissors still buzzed in their minds. The nurse lay awake, tracing her scalp with her fingers. Every touch reminded her of who she used to be, her braid, her fiancé, her hospital ward in Hamburg, all gone. In the dim candlelight, one prisoner did something shocking. She picked up the cam, pissued scissors, and began cutting what little hair she had left. "We're all the same now," she muttered, "so let's finish it." Soon others followed. Snip by snip, they evened out the patches left by the guards, turning humiliation into a strange act of control. Reports later showed that delousing protocols had slashed typhus infections by nearly 80% across Allied zones. The science made sense, the feeling didn't. They treated us like disease, not enemies. One woman wrote in her diary, and maybe that hurt worse. By dawn, the barracks smelled of soap and sweat. The women sat in silence, heads bandaged with cloth strips, waiting for roll call. Outside, frost coated the barbed wire like glass. A single guard patrolled with a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark. Then the door creaked open. A British nurse stepped inside, uniform crisp, eyes heavy. She held a small wooden box in one hand. Inside, more scissors gleamed. For a heartbeat, the women froze, thinking another round was coming. But the nurse didn't speak. She only set down the box, rolled up her sleeve, and reached for her own braid. The barracks fell utterly still. The British nurse stood beneath a flickering lamp, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the scissors. Every German woman watched in silence, waiting to see what she'd do. Then snip. A sharp, metallic sound cut through the air. Her braid fell to the floor, a heavy, clean coil against the dusty wood. Nobody breathed. The nurse looked at them, eyes steady now. "Rules apply to me too," she said quietly, her accent crisp, her voice thin with fatigue. She bent, gathered the hair, and placed it beside the others on the floor, one more offering to the logic of war. It wasn't pity, it was protocol. Under 1945, Geneva Convention regulations, delousing wasn't supposed to discriminate between POW and staff. But no one had ever expected to see an Allied nurse follow it so literally. In that moment, something cracked not in the system, but in perception. The women who'd felt like vermin now saw a uniformed woman voluntarily strip away her pride too. The nurse handed the scissors to a German prisoner. "Finish it," she said. The prisoner hesitated, then obeyed, clipping away the last few strands from the nurse's head. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. The transformation was jarring. The British nurse, now bare, scalped like them, looked a human. Not enemy, not savior. Just another woman trapped in a war that erased softness from every side. Later, as they queued for rations, one POW whispered, "It was the first time we saw fairness from the other side." Another nodded but added, "Fairness doesn't fill stomachs." The nurse overheard. She didn't argue. She just looked at the pot of barley soup being ladled out and sighed. Outside, the sky had turned iron grey. Steam, from the kitchen tent, drifted through the wire fence, carrying a smell of boiled grain and metal. The women lined up, bowls in hand, heads bowed not from shame this time, but hunger. Fairness could shave a head, but it couldn't stop the stomach from twisting. Hunger was next, the kind that made rules blur and decency bend. And as the first bowls were served, someone at the back whispered the word that would define the next weeks: starving. The next morning began with the smell of boiled barley and damp uniforms. The women lined up with dented tin bowls, waiting for what passed as breakfast: one ladle of watery soup, a few potato skins drifting like ghosts. The nurse from Hamburg stared into hers. She could count the calories just by looking, maybe 600 in total. Enough to keep a body alive, not enough to keep it human. The guard serving them avoided eye contact. He was young, freckles dusted across his nose, boots too big for his feet. "Next," he said again and again like a machine. Behind him, steam hissed from the kettle, rising like breath from some tired animal. The British rations, official records show, had fallen below 1-200 calories per day in early post, or months. Bread was rationed even for civilians. The war was over, but scarcity didn't surrender when Berlin did. And so, hunger became the new enemy, quiet, invisible, patient. Inside the barracks, the women learned to barter. A ring traded for a biscuit, a family photo for half a loaf. One woman whispered that she'd sell her wedding band for a spoonful of jam. Another said she'd eat soap if it smelled like bread. They laughed. But it wasn't really a joke. The nurse from Hamburg felt her stomach twist in waves. She thought of the hospital kitchen back home, where she'd once thrown away leftovers without guilt. Now she scraped every grain from her bowl with her finger, licking it clean. Hunger stripped manners first, pride next. At night they heard the guards talking outside, one voice low and ashamed, "I can't watch them starve." Another answered, "Orders, mate, they get what's written, nothing more." But the first guard didn't forget that line. The next dawn, as frost clung to the fence wires, something landed softly in the dirt. A crust of bread, still warm, half-eaten. None of the women moved. It felt like a trap. Then the nurse stepped forward, picked it up, and tore it into 5 pieces. She didn't eat first. She handed the crumbs around, eyes never lifting from the guard tower. That single act, one loaf cut, one risk taken, was the first bridge built across the wire. And by nightfall, guilt on one side would meet gratitude on the other. It happened at dusk, the hour when shadows stretched long enough to hide shame. A British sentry, the same young guard with freckles and tired eyes, paced near the outer fence. In his hand, a half-loaf of bread wrapped in paper. He looked around once, twice, then quick flick of the wrist. It sailed through the wire. The loaf hit the ground and rolled toward the women gathered near the barracks. For a few heartbeats, no one dared move. The fence buzzed faintly with power, the air thick with risk. Then the nurse from Hamburg crouched, brushed the dirt off, and broke the loaf in half. Instead of eating, she divided it again. 5, 10, 12 pieces. Each one passed silently from palm to palm. No one spoke. The bread disappeared faster than a prayer, crumbs vanishing into trembling hands. Hunger softened suspicion, then turned it into something strange, respect. From the tower another guard shouted, "Hey, what was that?" But the freckled sentry just shrugged, pretending to adjust his rifle. Later, the women heard him being scolded inside the command tent. The next morning he was still there, eyes red, lips tight, but when he walked past the fence, he gave the smallest nod. British records later described such exchanges as unauthorized fraternization. A 37% of recorded infractions that year involved food passed to POW. Compassion had officially become contraband. Inside the camp, something shifted. The women started saving crumbs, pressing them into tiny shapes. Stars, crosses, even small birds. They called them Glückskrummel, luck crumbs. The nurse from Hamburg kept one in her pocket for days, the crust turning hard and grey. That night she wrote in her hidden diary, "He risked punishment for us. Why?" The question haunted her. The enemy wasn't behaving like the enemy. Maybe war had been lying all along. Days later, a new sound broke the camp's monotony. The cry of a child. It came from the motor convoy that had just arrived with new prisoners. The nurse ran to the wire, squinting. Among the soldiers stepping down was a tiny figure, hair tangled, face streaked with dirt. It wasn't possible. They didn't take children here, but the British officer's voice confirmed it. Found her hiding in a transport truck. She's one of yours. And just like that, hunger was replaced by something even heavier, responsibility. When the truck doors swung open, silence rippled through the camp. Inside stood a girl, maybe 10 years old, clutching a torn doll missing an arm. Her cheeks were smudged with soot, her hair matted with grease and fear. The British officer reading the manifest looked confused. No listing for a child, he muttered. She must have climbed aboard before capture. The German women pressed against the fence, speechless. One finally whispered, "She's just a baby." The guard hesitated. Orders say anyone found with a convoy is to be processed as a POW. The women erupted pleading, shouting in broken English, begging for mercy. But bureaucracy doesn't flinch. It just writes another name. So the girl was assigned a number. Her doll was confiscated, and she was sent inside the barbed wire. The nurse from Hamburg took her hand first. The child's skin burned with fever. "Why heist do?" she asked softly. "Lena," the girl murmured. That one word broke every wall left standing. Within hours, the women had pooled scraps, fabric from uniforms, buttons from coats, to make her a small blanket. That night, they hid her in their barracks. The rule was clear. Non-combatants were to be separated and transported. But none of them could bear to see her taken. Even a child was a prisoner of our war. The nurse wrote later. Official records back it. Over 800 minors were classified as non-combatant POW dependents. By 1945, swept up in military captures they didn't understand. As Lena's fever worsened, the women panicked. They knew the infirmary tent by reputation, cold metal beds, the smell of disinfectant, and an allied doctor rumored to care more about forms than faces. Still, they had no choice. Wrapped in a wool blanket, Lena was carried through the night fog to the medical tent. "What if I fail?" His expression unreadable. "I am moving SIDE." The The doctor turned gloved, masked, indifferent. "Another one?" he asked a child. The nurse replied. His posture stiffened, then softened. "Lay her down." The women stepped back as the doctor examined the girl, murmuring something about typhus risk. For a second, the nurse feared he'd turned them away. Instead, he sighed and reached for a stethoscope. That small sound, metal touching flesh, marked the first moment Mercy entered the camp by rule, not rebellion. The infirmary tent smelled of carbolic acid and damp canvas. Lanterns hissed against the dark, their light trembling on metal instruments. The British doctor didn't look up as the nurse from Hamburg laid the child on the cot. He had that exhausted precision of someone who'd seen too much dying to react any more. "Name?" he asked flatly. "Lena," the nurse whispered. "Not on any list. She's 10. The doctor paused, then without another word pulled on his gloves. The girl shivered uncontrollably. Her small hands clenching the blanket like it could hold her together. The nurse watched, heart-pounding. In her mind, she expected cold efficiency detachment. Instead, the doctor checked Lena's pulse, then covered her gently with his own coat. "She needs broth and rest," he murmured, and no more shouting. It was the smallest thing, a coat, a tone, but it cracked through weeks of bitterness. For the first time, an Allied hand didn't take something away, it gave. Over the next days, the infirmary became a quiet battlefield of care. The doctor worked late, treating injuries without question. When supplies ran low, he split rations with patients. Red Cross records later showed that by 1946, recovery rates for Axis POW under Allied medical supervision had climbed above 70%, proof that Mercy, even after carnage, could function like strategy. The nurse from Hamburg cleaned wounds beside him. They spoke little, but gestures filled the silence. She handed him bandages, he handed her trust. For the women outside, the story spread like rumor. The enemy's doctor saved our child. Lena's fever broke on the fourth night. She opened her eyes, whispered something in German the doctor didn't understand, and smiled weakly. The nurse translated. She said she dreamed of home. The doctor nodded, adjusting her blanket, then stepped outside to smoke under the cold stars. He exhaled, muttering to no one, "We can't win peace by letting children die." Outside, the wind carried the faint crackle of a loudspeaker. News filtering in from beyond the fences. Words like Dresden and Berlin ruins drifted across the camp, turning Mercy into melancholy. The nurse heard it too. When she stepped out of the tent, the doctor's cigarette ember reflected in her eyes, two small lights in a world still burning. The loudspeaker crackled again the next morning, static, then a clipped British voice reading the latest dispatches. Dresden devastated. Civilian casualties extensive. The words hit the women harder than any punishment could. The nurse from Hamburg froze mid-step, the basin in her hands trembling. She knew that name. Dresden wasn't just a city, it was her home. When the mail cart arrived that afternoon, she didn't expect her name to be called. But it was Reinhardt Anna. The clerk read, a single envelope, edges singed, smell faintly of smoke. She tore it open with shaking hands. The handwriting was her sister's, or what was left of it. "Anna, the house is gone, mother too. The river burns at night, I am alive." She read the words twice, then stopped breathing. The barracks around her faded into static. Her knees buckled and the letter slipped into the mud. Someone caught her before she fell. A fellow prisoner, hair still short, eyes hollow. The British officer nearby didn't interfere. He'd seen this scene too many times. POW receiving news of homes that no longer existed. Dresden's firebombing, February 1945, had killed more than 25 zeros, and left over 75 homeless. To the women here, it wasn't a headline. It was a mirror proof that there was nowhere left to return to. That night, the nurse sat outside the barracks, letter in her lap. The moonlight turned the paper silver. "We weren't POW anymore," she whispered. "We were ghosts." The British nurse, the one who had once cut her own hair, sat down beside her. She didn't speak, just shared a cigarette. Two silhouettes, two sides, one silence. Across the fence, a guard hummed a tune under his breath, something faintly familiar, Lily Marlene. The song that once carried through both trenches, now drifting between wire and ashes. The nurse looked at the sky, black smoke streaks, fading into dawn. Her grief didn't harden, it hollowed her out. Inside that hollow, something new started forming, not forgiveness yet, but understanding. Because, if every side had lost everything, maybe the lines between them had already burned away. And in the morning, when the women hung their washed uniforms to dry, the sound of laughter, light, impossible laughter, broke the stillness for the first time since their capture. The sound was so unexpected, it startled the guards. Laughter, real breathless laughter drifting from the laundry yard. For weeks, the camp had been nothing but clanking tin bowls and quiet sobs. Now, the air buzzed with something fragile and unfamiliar, joy trying to remember itself. It began with a delivery, bolts of worn fabric, old uniforms too torn for reuse. The British relief staff said they were for cleaning rags, but the German women had other plans. Under the sharp winter sun, they stretched clotheslines between the barracks, threading rope through fence posts. The air smelled of soap, starch, and defiance. A British volunteer, a young woman named Margaret, stepped forward holding a sewing kit. "Let's make something worth wearing," she said with a grin. The nurse from Hamburg watched as the women gathered, hesitant but curious. Soon needles clinked like music, grey wool transformed into skirts, torn khaki became pockets, every stitch felt like rebellion. War had taken their names, their homes, their hair, but it couldn't stop their hands from creating again. One of the guards leaned on his rifle, pretending not to watch. "Never thought I'd see prisoners sewing dresses," he muttered. His sergeant replied, "Let them, maybe they'll remember their people." By afternoon, colour had returned, not in hue but in spirit. Women twirled in makeshift skirts, laughing when the seams split. Someone began humming a tune. Even the child, Lena, sat in the shade, threading buttons like treasure. British records later noted that more than 4,000 female POW were assigned to textile repair by 1946, a policy meant for labour but accidentally sowing humanity. "They gave us needles, not rifles," one woman would later write. The nurse from Hamburg pricked her finger on a pin and laughed at the sight of blood. It reminded her she was still alive. Margaret passed her a bandage and said softly, "Looks good on you, love." The nurse blinked, half smiling, half crying. As the sun dipped, dresses hung like flags of survival on the laundry lines, swaying gently in the breeze. The women stood shoulder to shoulder looking at what they'd made. One of them whispered, "If we can make this from rags, maybe we can make life again." She didn't know yet, one of those dresses would soon travel across the world, carrying their story stitched into its seams. Weeks turned into a rhythm of thread and breath. The sewing hall, once silent, now hummed like a beehive. Needles clicked, fabric rustled, the smell of starch and soap replaced disinfectant. The women stitched blankets for the Red Cross, each loop of thread a small rebellion against despair. The nurse from Hamburg, Anna, had become one of the fastest weavers. Her fingers remembered precision from her hospital days. Every night she stayed late, eyes burning from kerosene lamps, hands raw from the coarse wool. But one night she did something different. As she folded a finished blanket, she slipped a note into the hem, not a plea, not anger. Just a few words in German, "We are alive, we can still feel." Then she stitched the edge shut. A month later, that same blanket travelled out of the camp with a shipment of medical supplies. It was marked for another POW facility in Belgium. Weeks after, across a continent scarred by war, a German soldier unwrapped it. Inside he found a note and a photograph stapled to the tag. The picture showed a woman with a shaved head, half smiling, half daring the world to judge her. He didn't know her name. But he recognized something else, dignity in defeat. Her hair was gone. He'd later write in a letter, but she looked stronger than our weapons ever did. The British nurse who oversaw the looms saw that too. She started secretly keeping duplicates of the women's photos, labeling them with initials and dates. "History won't remember them," she said quietly, "but I will." By mid-1947, Red Cross data shows over 25 million POW letters had crossed Allied and Axis lines. Among them were a handful of unmarked messages hidden in quilts, uniforms, food crates. Words traveled further than soldiers ever could. Inside the camp, rumors began spreading. Repatriation lists are coming. Some women didn't believe it. Others started packing invisible suitcases, dreams of family, streets, perfume, home. Anna didn't dare hope yet. She kept weaving, thread after thread, until her hands shook. When she finally looked up, Margaret, the British volunteer, was standing in the doorway with a clipboard. "Names," Margaret said softly. "They've started calling names." The loom fell silent. Threads dangled midair. Outside, the cold wind carried a sound that could be joy or goodbye. It started with the sound of boots on gravel, then paper rustling, then names. A British officer stood before the women with a clipboard, and a voice so formal it barely seemed human. "These are the first to go home," he said. The word home hung in the cold morning air like something sacred and dangerous. Anna clutched her blanket, heart hammering. Around her, whispers spread fast. Some women prayed, others stared straight ahead, afraid to want anything. The officer began reading, Schmidt, Weber, Reinhardt, her name. For a second, Anna didn't move. The woman beside her pushed her forward gently. "Go," she whispered, but Anna's feet felt glued to the mud. After months of captivity, freedom suddenly looked suspicious, like another trick. One by one, the chosen stepped toward the trucks idling near the gate. Those left behind clapped softly, forcing smiles that broke halfway. Tears ran down faces too numb to feel them. British documents later recorded over 40,000 repatriations a month in late 1947. But numbers couldn't capture what it felt like to be excluded from a list that promised life again. Survivors' guilt began before anyone even left the camp. Anna climbed onto the truck bed, gripping the wooden side. Her stomach twisted as she looked back at the women still behind the wire. They waved small, slow gestures of people pretending not to break. The British nurse, Margaret, stood beside them, her shaved head growing back in soft curls. She gave a single nod. The engines started. Diesel fumes filled the air. The sound was deafening, but the silence between heartbeats was louder. Inside her coat pocket, Anna still carried the tiny Glückskrummel, the crumb of bread she'd once saved from the guard's secret gift. She rubbed it like a charm, whispering a prayer that didn't have words. As the convoy rolled toward the open road, the camp shrank behind her. Barbed wire, smoke, and memories folding into the horizon. Freedom didn't taste like victory, it tasted like survivors' guilt and dust. Freedom felt like betrayal, one woman later said. And Anna understood exactly what she meant, because the farther she went, the more she realized she wasn't returning home. She was heading toward what was left of it, and as the truck crossed the checkpoint, the rails ahead began to glisten in the distance. Tracks that would carry her deeper into the ruins of Germany. The transport train screamed like a wounded animal as it pulled out of the Allied depot. Steel wheels screeched against frozen tracks, the sound echoing through the wrecked valleys of post-war Europe. Inside the cattle cars, wooden benches replaced dignity, but the women didn't care. For the first time in years, the wire was behind them. Anna sat near a small window slit, watching the landscape blur. Burnt fields, collapsed bridges, villages stripped to their bones. Every tunnel they passed through sounded like an air raid. Every flicker of shadow made hearts race. The war might have ended on paper, but in their nerves it was still firing. Outside, Germany unfolded like a ghost. Smoke still rose from factory shells. Church spires leaned crooked against grey skies. Estimates say by 1946, 70% of German cities bore industrial damage. The country looked like a photograph that had been burned halfway through. The women spoke in murmurs. What if no one's left? What if they hate us for surviving? No one answered. Hunger and silence had become the only languages they trusted. Halfway through the journey, British guards handed out rations, bread, jam, weak tea. Anna chewed slowly, tasting salt and memory. The guard who passed her cup avoided her eyes. Maybe guilt lived on both sides of the train. As the convoy slowed near Dresden, Anna leaned forward. The city's outline rose through the mist-blackened rubble, twisted tram lines. The skeletons of buildings with no walls left to fall. It didn't look like a place. It looked like a memory refusing to die. The train stopped. Reinhardt, the officer, called. Anna climbed down, her boots sinking into ash. The platform was silent except for the faint creak of metal and the wind whistling through shattered windows. She looked around for something familiar, a sign, a street, a smell, but there was only dust. Her heart clenched at the realization she had reached home. Behind her, another woman whispered, "This isn't home. It's what's left of one." Anna didn't respond. She started walking toward the ruins anyway, each step slower, heavier. And then, just ahead, glinting under the grey light, she saw it. An old barber's mirror, half buried in debris, its cracked glass catching her reflection for the first time since the camp. The mirror was the only thing left standing, propped against a pile of bricks where a shop once stood, its frame blackened, glass fractured into a dozen uneven shards. Anna knelt before it slowly, the wind lifting dust into her eyes. For a long moment she didn't dare look. When she finally did, her reflection startled her. The hair had started to grow back, short and uneven, soft as ash. Her face was thinner, eyes sunken but steady. The woman staring back wasn't the nurse who'd left Hamburg, or the prisoner who'd wept over a tin bowl. She was something else, something forged. All around, Dresden lay silent. No sound of church bells, no laughter from cafes, no footsteps except her own. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and damp plaster. Between collapsed buildings, wildflowers pushed through the cracks. Life, stubborn and quiet, had begun reclaiming what war had abandoned. Anna brushed dust off the mirror's edge. Her fingers came away black. A single word carved faintly into the wooden frame caught her eye. Freiser. Barber, she realized. This was the same street where her mother once brought her for haircuts as a girl. Her throat tightened. The mirror didn't lie. She murmured, the war had cut more than hair. In the broken glass, her reflection multiplied. 15 versions of herself staring back. The nurse, the captive, the survivor, the ghost. She saw Margaret's face in memory too, the British nurse who'd cut her own braid. Maybe this mirror didn't belong to one side or the other. Maybe it belonged to everyone who'd lost their reflection to the war. Behind her, footsteps crunched. She turned, a woman stood there, familiar posture, same cropped hair catching the light. For a heartbeat, Anna couldn't speak. It was one of her fellow prisoners, a seamstress from the camp, carrying a bundle of rags under her arm. Neither of them smiled right away. They just looked, two faces reflected in a single cracked mirror, proof that survival wasn't just endurance, it was recognition. Then, quietly, the seamstress said, "There are children nearby, orphans, they need clothes." Anna nodded. The mirror's fractured image faded behind her as they walked toward the sound of faint laughter, among the ruins, toward a new kind of work. The orphan shelter had no roof, just tarps stretched between scorched walls, fluttering like ghosts. Inside, a dozen children huddled around a small stove, their faces pale and watchful. Anna stood at the doorway, clutching a bundle of torn cloth. The seamstress beside her smiled weakly. "We'll start with these," she said. They spread the rags on a table that used to be a door. Scissors flashed, thread pulled tight. For hours they worked wordlessly, their hands remembering the rhythm of the camp's sewing room. The same stitching that once kept them sane. Now it was keeping others alive. A little girl approached, barefoot and shivering. Anna knelt, slipping a patchwork shirt over her shoulders. "Warm?" she asked. The girl nodded, grinning shyly. The sound of a laugh, light, real, broke the tension like sunlight through smoke. Soon more women from nearby ruins joined them. Some had been POW, others refugees. They stitched together everything they could salvage: curtains, old uniforms, tablecloth scraps, baby clothes, doll dresses, a rebirth in thread and dust. UNICEF reports later noted over 1.5 million German children receiving relief by 1948. But what the reports didn't show were the faces, the trembling smiles when fabric touched skin, the relief when strangers became caretakers. Anna's needle slipped once, pricking her thumb, blood beaded, bright against grey cloth. She didn't flinch. Pain, she realized, had lost its sting. Creation had replaced it. The seamstress looked up from her work. "We learned rebuilding begins with small hands," she said softly. At dusk, the children gathered around the stove. Someone found a tin whistle, and a hesitant tune filled the air. It wasn't Lily Marlene this time. It was gentler, something new. The women sat together, breathing in the rhythm, the smoke curling like prayer. Anna's gaze drifted to the doorway. On the table lay her old coat, the one she'd worn through capture, camp, release. She reached into its pocket, feeling something crinkled. A letter. She didn't remember putting it there. The envelope was stamped with a British postmark. No return address. Her name carefully written in blue ink. She froze, fingers trembling. The seamstress noticed. "You going to open it?" Anna nodded slowly, tucking the letter close to her chest. "Not yet," she whispered. "Tomorrow." Outside, the night settled softly over Dresden's ruins, quiet, watchful, almost forgiving. Morning light crept through the broken windows, painting the walls in thin gold lines. The city outside was waking, wagons creaking, birds returning to the trees that had survived the firestorms. Anna sat by the stove, the unopened letter resting in her lap. The envelope was yellowed now, edges curled from weeks of travel and ash. She traced the handwriting again. Margaret, her heart thudded softly. The British nurse. The one who had stood in that freezing barracks months ago, scissors in hand, braid falling to the floor. The woman who had taught her that fairness could exist even in captivity. Anna inhaled deeply, then broke the seal. The letter was short, just a page. "Anna, I hope you made it home, whatever home means now. I've cut my hair again, it grows too fast for my conscience. I keep thinking about that morning in the camp. What we take away isn't always loss, sometimes it's how we start again." Anna's vision blurred. The words weren't sentimental, they were simple, clean, almost clinical. But behind every line was the sound of clippers, the smell of disinfectant, the quiet rebellion of two women shaving away the past to make room for something new. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest. Around her, the children stirred awake. One tugged at her sleeve, holding up a rag doll dressed in scraps from their sewing. "For you," the child said. Anna smiled, blinking tears. "Thank you, Klein son." She whispered. Outside, the church bells began to ring again, cracked, uneven, but alive. The sound filled the hollow streets like a heartbeat returning. Anna stepped outside, letter still in hand. By 1950, reports showed that 95% of Axis POW had been returned or resettled. But those numbers couldn't measure what had truly been rebuilt, the invisible architecture of empathy forged between enemies. Anna looked toward the horizon. The air smelled of rain, earth, and something else: possibility. Maybe mercy, she thought, was the only victory left. She tucked Margaret's letter into her coat pocket, beside the crumb of bread she'd kept all this time. Both relics of survival, both proofs that humanity, like hair, always grows back. And as she walked toward the market square, the wind caught her cropped hair, lifting it gently, like forgiveness finding shape again in the ruins.